I have always known that the real storms never begin with thunder, lightning, or warning clouds swirling above a broken horizon. They begin quietly, invisibly, inside the tight space between your ribs where no one can see. That's where my storm had been brewing for years, unacknowledged and ignored, until it finally cracked open on a picture-perfect afternoon, under a cloudless sky, on the balcony of our family's opulent beachfront villa. The sunlight was almost too bright, glaring off the polished white marble floors, bouncing against the pristine railings, blinding in its cruelty, as if daring me to shatter the illusion everyone else had worked so tirelessly to maintain. My family, God bless them and all their complicated flaws, had descended on this luxury house like it was a holy temple, unpacking suitcases, stringing up fairy lights, laughing over old memories, pretending for a little while that we were still whole, still happy, still the family they wanted the world to believe in. I was there too, of course, standing near the railing with a smile so carefully plastered across my face it felt like a second skin, watching as Amber, my older sister by 2 years and self-declared queen of family vacations, breezed across the balcony carrying the baby monitor in one hand and a gleaming mimosa in the other. She wasn't looking at me when she shoved the monitor into my hands. She never looked when she handed me responsibility because she never thought she needed permission. "You're the best with kids anyway, Jenna," Amber said, her voice syrupy sweet, the kind of sweet that burns your throat going down, the kind of sweet you know is meant to cover something rotten underneath. The monitor was warm from her grip, but my hands were cold, clammy even, as I wrapped my fingers around it, feeling the familiar weight of expectations settle on my shoulders like it always did. In that moment, something deep inside me, something that had been buried under years of compliance and careful swallowing of anger, shifted slightly, a tectonic plate realigning in the dark. "No," I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth, strange and heavy, like a stone dragged up from the bottom of a river where it had been lying unseen for far too long. Amber froze, mid-laugh, mid-smile, her perfect white teeth still bared like a weapon she hadn't realized she was about to drop. For one glorious, terrifying second, no one said a thing. The world held its breath with me, waiting to see if I would take it back, soften it, apologize for daring to want something different. "I'm booking my own room this time," I added, voice low but steady, the kind of steady that comes from knowing you have nothing left to lose. Amber's eyes narrowed so quickly it was almost funny, her pretty face tightening into a brittle mask of disbelief and wounded pride. She set down her drink with a little too much force, the crystal flute clinking against the table's edge, and took a sharp step toward me. "You're seriously abandoning us?" she hissed, loud enough that the others, my mother fussing over beach towels, my father fiddling with the grill, even my cousins setting up their volleyball net, all turned their heads slightly, antennae tuned to the sudden change in the air. My stomach twisted sharply, an old reflex born of years trying to smooth things over before they broke apart, but I stood there, every cell in my body screaming at me to hold the line. "I'm choosing myself for once," I said, softer now, but without flinching, and I watched her flinch for me instead. Amber's mouth opened, then closed again, the words forming and dying in her throat, her hands twitching uselessly at her sides like she wanted to grab the moment and reshape it back into something she could control. In the background, my mother's voice rose in that thin, desperate pitch she used whenever the family myth started to crack. "Jenna, sweetheart, don't cause a scene, it's just tradition, you know we all pitch in, it's nothing new." It was everything new. It was every goddamn thing new. And once you see the bars of a cage for what they are, you can never unsee them again. The room I booked for myself was more beautiful than anything I had dared to imagine, but as I turned the key and crossed the threshold, the overwhelming sense of freedom tasted almost bitter on my tongue, sharp and metallic like the aftermath of biting your lip too hard in a desperate effort to keep yourself from screaming. Sunlight poured in through massive floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling like molten gold across the soft sand-colored carpets and the pristine white sheets of the king-sized bed that looked big enough to drown in. I dropped my small suitcase by the door, the dull thud it made echoing too loudly in the thick, unfamiliar quiet, and for a long moment I just stood there, my hand still resting on the door handle as if I might need to grab it and run at any moment. Freedom, I realized, is a double-edged sword, glinting and dangerous. It cuts away the chains you've worn for so long you forgot they were there, but it also slices into the illusions you clung to just to survive. I let the door click softly shut behind me and crossed to the bed, pressing my palms against the cool, fresh linen, grounding myself, forcing the rising panic back down into the pit of my stomach where it belonged. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, there were no expectations here, no one hovering over me demanding that I give until there was nothing left but a hollow girl with a nice smile and tired eyes. It was just me, Jenna, alone and unclaimed. The thought should have comforted me, should have made me soar, but instead it wrapped itself around my throat like invisible hands, squeezing tight. I opened the sliding glass door to the private balcony, stepping outside to the faint, rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore, the salty air cool against my burning skin. Below me, I could see the sprawling courtyard where my family was still gathering, a colorful chaos of towels, coolers, floaties, and laughter that didn't quite reach the hollow core inside me anymore. I should have stayed out there, should have let the ocean's steady heartbeat drown out the mess of emotions twisting inside my chest. I should have breathed deep and let it go. Instead, I turned back inside, closing the door carefully behind me, and moved toward the shared wall that separated my suite from the one next door. Amber's suite. At first, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Truly, I wasn't. I was just putting away my toiletries, unpacking the few items of clothing I had thrown into my bag without much thought, when I heard it, the low murmur of voices, intense and urgent, seeping through the thin walls like smoke through the cracks of a locked door. I froze, one hand halfway to the dresser drawer, my heart leaping into my throat so hard and fast it made me dizzy. "You're unbelievable, Amber," my mother's voice snapped, low and tight, like a rubber band stretched to the point of snapping. She was fine. Why did you have to push? I set the toiletries down with trembling fingers, tiptoeing toward the wall with the same sick, guilty instinct you have when you see smoke curling under a door and your body moves toward it before your brain can tell you it's a terrible idea. "I told you we should have told Jenna earlier. Now look what you've done." Amber hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the plaster between us, clear and vicious. I pressed my ear harder against the cool wall, blood roaring in my ears louder than the waves outside, louder than the world itself. "She doesn't even know she's adopted," Amber spat out, each word punching the air with brutal precision, each syllable a blow straight to my gut. "What happens if she figures it out now?" The words didn't just hit me, they detonated inside me, a silent explosion that left no visible scars but shattered everything I had ever believed about myself into 1,000 jagged, glittering pieces. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think beyond the raw, ugly word pulsing in my mind. Adopted. I stumbled back from the wall as if it had physically struck me, my hands trembling so violently I had to grip the edge of the dresser to stay upright. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, the room tilting around me like a funhouse ride gone terribly wrong. It was as if the floorboards had been yanked out from beneath my feet, and I was plunging into some black abyss I hadn't even known was there, some vast chasm of lies and half-truths that had been carefully constructed beneath my very existence. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my forehead against the dresser's cool, smooth surface, trying to force back the flood of questions screaming inside me. How long had they known? How many holidays, birthdays, and meaningless family arguments had they smiled at me, hugged me, pretended I was one of them, all the while knowing I was something other? Not their blood. Not their real daughter. Just a well-kept secret. A polite lie with a pretty name. Jenna. I felt like a fool, Standing there in my luxury suite that was supposed to represent freedom and autonomy, realizing that everything I had thought I was freeing myself from had never even been real to begin with. My entire identity, the very foundation of my place in this family, had been a carefully constructed illusion, and I had been the only one who didn't know. I stumbled toward the bathroom, turning the faucet on full blast to drown out the sounds of my own ragged breathing, splashing icy water onto my burning face. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong somehow, too pale, too wide-eyed, too fragile, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize the girl staring back at me. "Who are you?" I whispered, the words fogging up the glass, ghostly and unfamiliar. There was a soft knock at my door then, sharp and tentative, and my heart lurched painfully in my chest, as if it recognized instinctively that the person on the other side might just shatter me completely if I let them in. "Jenna, it's Mom," my mother's voice called, far too casual, far too calm, like she hadn't just been on the other side of that wall unraveling every truth I had ever believed in. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Another knock, a little firmer this time. "Sweetheart, can we talk?" Talk. The word felt like poison in my mouth. I knew if I opened that door, she would spin it all into something gentle, something understandable, something that would make it seem like this was no big deal, like I was overreacting, like I should be grateful they had chosen me, raised me, loved me. They would want me to stay silent, to forgive, to fold myself back into the lie like a good girl. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Maybe I never had been. I backed away from the door slowly, deliberately, my heart pounding so hard it was a wonder she couldn't hear it through the wood. I grabbed my bag, still half unpacked on the bed, and stuffed my things back inside with frantic, jerky movements. I wasn't staying here. I couldn't. Not under their roof, not under their lies. I didn't care if it was Christmas, Thanksgiving, the family reunion, or the last damn vacation we ever took together. I was done playing the grateful daughter, the easy child, the good little secret. I was going to find out who I really was, even if it meant tearing my entire life apart to do it, even if it meant walking away from everything and everyone I had ever known. I don't know how long I sat there in my suite after packing up my few belongings again, my mind an ugly, spinning carousel of half-formed thoughts, raw memories, and questions that felt like knives slowly twisting deeper with every breath I took. The world outside had darkened, the last streaks of sunset bleeding away into a bruised purple sky, leaving the beach and the villa bathed in an eerie, ghostly blue that seemed almost too beautiful for the ugliness burning like acid inside my chest. Somewhere below, I could hear the muted sounds of my family pretending that nothing had changed, their laughter ringing hollow across the open courtyard, like the desperate clanging of a cracked bell, calling people to a church that had already burned to the ground. I knew I couldn't stay hidden in my room forever. I wasn't built for cowardice, no matter how many years I had been taught to shrink myself down to something small enough to survive unnoticed. If they wanted to pretend nothing had happened, if they wanted to sweep it under the rug like every other dirty little secret this family had polished and hidden away, then they had sorely underestimated the girl they had raised to be compliant, but had accidentally made fierce instead. I grabbed my worn leather sandals, slipped them on with shaking hands, and forced myself to walk out of the room, my body moving on pure instinct even as my heart thundered so loudly inside my ribcage I thought surely it would give me away. The air outside was warm and heavy, thick with the scent of salt and the sweet, cloying perfume of the flowering vines that curled up the stone pillars surrounding the villa's pool area. The pool shimmered under the moonlight like a polished mirror laid out for gods too cruel to care about the mortals beneath them. And standing at the far edge of that water, framed by the surreal glow, was Amber. She was barefoot, her cocktail dress wrinkled at the hem, one hand clenching a half-empty wine glass, her posture stiff with agitation. For one long moment, I just watched her from the shadows, taking in the sister I had loved and hated in equal measure for most of my life, the girl who had laughed with me under blanket forts and pushed me down hard enough to scrape my knees raw, The girl who had braided my hair on the school bus and then ignored me at lunch so her friends wouldn't call her weird. Amber, who had handed me the baby monitor that afternoon with the same casual entitlement she always used when asking for something she believed was already hers. Amber, who had known the truth about me, about my blood, about the lie at the center of my existence, and had kept it hidden not out of love, but out of resentment. The knowledge burned inside me like a wildfire, and before I could think better of it, before I could give myself the chance to turn back, I stepped forward into the moonlight, my footsteps sharp and deliberate against the stone. She heard me immediately, her head snapping up, her mouth opening slightly in shock before she slammed the expression shut, replacing it with that brittle, icy mask she always wore when she was cornered. "Jenna," she said, her voice carefully neutral, as if she could erase the afternoon's revelations with a single well-placed word. "I was just coming to find you." "Don't," I said, my voice cracking once on the word but hardening immediately after, forged into steel by the sheer weight of the betrayal knotting my stomach. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation flashing across her face like a storm cloud scudding too fast across an already broken sky. I walked closer until there was barely a few feet of glistening stone between us, the pool behind her reflecting her stiff silhouette back at me like a funhouse mirror, warped and too sharp around the edges. "You owe me the truth," I said, each word trembling on the edge of control, each syllable carved from the wreckage of everything I had ever believed about us. Amber shifted her weight uneasily, setting the wine glass down on the stone edge. With a faint clink, her arms crossing tightly over her chest in the universal language of guilt. "You heard," she said, not a question, not a guess, just a grim, dead certainty. "I heard enough," I whispered, my voice shuddering like the first gust of a coming storm. For a long moment, she said nothing, her mouth pressed into a hard, thin line, her eyes darting once toward the villa as if hoping anyone would come and rescue her from the mess she had helped create. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and bitter, stripped of all the pretty lies she usually coated her words in. "You were never supposed to find out like this," she muttered, each word landing heavy between us, poisoning the humid night air. "You mean," I said, my hands balling into fists at my sides, "you would have been just fine if I had stayed your good little puppet forever, never questioning why I always felt like an outsider in my own damn family?" Amber flinched just barely, but it was enough. I pressed forward, my voice gaining strength with every syllable, with every memory that surged back through the damning floodgates of my mind. "You spent years making me feel guilty," I said, each word slicing clean and merciless, "just because I was never your blood?" Amber's face twisted then, her lips curling back in a snarl I had only ever glimpsed in flashes during our worst fights. "You were always favored," she spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "They doted on you like you were some miracle they had been blessed with, while I was just the responsible one, the easy one, the background noise to your golden child narrative." I recoiled as if she had physically struck me, the words slamming into me harder than I could have prepared for. "You think it was easy for me?" Amber continued, her voice rising to a dangerous pitch. Watching them pour all their attention into the outsider, into the charity case they dragged home and decided was more worthy of love than their own flesh and blood, tears pricked hot behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Not now. Not for her." "I didn't ask for any of this," I said, my voice shaking with the effort to hold myself together. "I didn't choose to be adopted. I didn't ask to be the scapegoat for your bitterness." Her laugh was hollow and sharp, a broken thing that echoed across the still water. "You were always so damn perfect," she sneered. "The one who got second chances, the one who got coddled, the one who never had to prove she belonged." I shook my head, disbelief and grief churning so violently inside me it was a wonder I could stay standing. "You think I felt like I belonged?" I said, my voice breaking now because it didn't matter how hard I fought, the truth was raw and ugly and bleeding out of me faster than I could stop it. "You think I didn't notice the way Mom and Dad always praised you louder, smiled bigger when you entered the room? You think I didn't spend years wondering why I always felt like I was standing outside a glass wall, watching you all laugh and love without me? Her mouth opened, then closed, and for the first time that night, I saw something flicker across her face that looked suspiciously like shame. Before either of us could say another word, we heard it, hurried footsteps slapping against the stone, panicked voices calling out our names. Our parents. They rounded the corner at a near run, my mother's hair coming loose from the elegant clip she always wore, my father's face drawn and pale under the moonlight, both of them looking like they had aged 10 years in a single evening. "Jenna," my mother gasped, skidding to a stop just a few feet away, her eyes wide and desperate. "Please, let's go inside. Let's talk about this properly." "You knew," I said, cutting her off, my voice dead and hollow, no longer needing confirmation, but demanding it anyway. "You both knew." My father opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard, like he was trying to force the right words up through a throat clogged with guilt and regret. My mother stepped forward, tears welling up in her eyes, hands outstretched like she could physically pull me back into the fold with nothing more than desperate love. "We were going to tell you," she whispered, voice cracking into pieces. We never found the right time." I laughed then, a sharp, broken sound that tasted like blood in the back of my throat. "There's no right time to tell someone they've been living a lie," I said, stepping back from her outstretched hands, from all of them, from everything. In my mother's tear-streaked face, in my father's hunched shoulders, in Amber's twisted mouth, I saw it, the heartbreak, the regret, the guilt. But I also saw the truth. They never wanted me to know because they were afraid of what it would change. The sunlight streaming through the villa's dining room windows looked almost fake in its brightness, too pristine, too harsh, too much like a cruel spotlight illuminating the wreckage of what used to pass for a family. The breakfast table was set beautifully, as if presentation alone could stitch back together what had been torn open the night before, with fine-boned china, fresh-cut orchids placed in delicate vases, and a spread of fruits and pastries that nobody touched. The silverware gleamed under the light like polished weapons laid carefully in surrender, and the chairs creaked quietly under the heavy, suffocating weight of the silence pressing down on all of us. I sat there, staring at my untouched plate, feeling more detached from the scene than I had ever felt in my entire life, like I was a ghost who had somehow wandered into a living family's meal and now hovered unseen at the edge of their shame. No one spoke. Not Amber, who sat stiffly across from me, her once flawless hair pulled back in a tight, punishing bun as if she could somehow discipline herself into becoming the good daughter overnight. Not my mother, whose hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the cloth napkin in her lap again and again, desperate for something, anything, to anchor herself to. Not my father, who cleared his throat every few minutes but never actually said the words gathering like stones behind his teeth. They didn't know how to fix it. They didn't even know where to begin. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't my job to make them comfortable anymore. It never should have been. I took a slow breath, feeling it steady my heart, feeling it thread steel back into my spine, and pushed my chair back with a soft, deliberate scrape that cut through the thick silence like a blade. Every eye at the table snapped to me, wide and wary, like animals catching the scent of a storm they had no hope of outrunning. Good. They needed to hear this. I rested my palms on the cool wood of the table, meeting each pair of guilty eyes without flinching, without softening, without offering them the easy absolution they were so obviously hoping for. "Being adopted," I began, my voice steady and low and carrying across the table like a slow-moving tidal wave, "doesn't make me less your daughter." I let the words settle there for a moment, heavy and inescapable, before I continued, my throat tightening with every syllable but refusing to break. "But being taken for granted," I said, voice sharpening like the edge of a knife being drawn deliberately across stone, "being treated like an afterthought, like a mistake you were trying to erase quietly, that does." My mother gasped softly, covering her mouth with trembling fingers, My father closed his eyes for a long, aching second, as if he could block out the truth by refusing to see it. And Amber dropped her gaze to the table, her shoulders sagging under the weight of a shame she had been running from for far too long. Good. They needed to sit with it. They needed to taste the bitterness of it the way I had been forced to for years, choking it down alone while smiling politely for their comfort. I spent my whole life trying to earn a place that was already mine, I said, my hands curling into fists on the table, my voice rising with the tide of everything they had buried and expected me to bury with it. I bent over backwards to be what you needed, to never rock the boat, to carry the weight of your expectations on my shoulders like some cursed birthright I was lucky to be given. Tears burned the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, refusing to let them fall, refusing to make this easier for them by giving them the performance of forgiveness they were probably still praying for. But I'm done, I said, the finality in my voice echoing off the pristine walls, making the room feel suddenly, irrevocably smaller. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into a family that only loved me when I stayed silent. I reached for my coffee, taking a slow sip like I had all the time in the world, letting the taste anchor me, reminding me that I was here, alive, real, and no longer beholden to anyone else's script. When this vacation ends, I said, setting the cup down carefully, deliberately, I won't be going home with you. Amber's head snapped up sharply, her mouth opening in protest, but for once, she caught herself before the words could come tumbling out, clenching her jaw so hard I could see the muscles twitch. I'm going to travel for a while, I said, my heart hammering hard against my ribs, not with fear this time, but with a fierce, untamed excitement that was so new it almost scared me. I'm going to find out who I am when I'm not carrying your expectations on my back like a second skin. My mother let out a soft, broken sound, half sob, half apology, but I didn't waver. I couldn't. I wouldn't. I love you, I said, surprising even myself with the truth of it, with the complicated, painful, stubborn love that still existed beneath all the wreckage. But I love myself too. And, for the first time in my life, I'm choosing me. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a scrape loud enough to feel like punctuation on the moment, and slung my small leather bag over my shoulder. The room stayed frozen in place, my family trapped in the wreckage of the lies they had built around themselves, finally forced to sit in the ruins and reckon with what they had done. And then, just as I turned to go, just as the first taste of freedom hit my tongue, raw and real and almost unbearably sweet, I heard it. Jenna, Amber called after me, her voice cracking open like a fault line splitting wide and raw under the pressure of too much truth too long buried. I was wrong. I paused, my hand tightening on the strap of my bag, my heart twisting sharply inside my chest. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze across the ruined battlefield of our family breakfast, and for the first time, I saw her not the perfect sister, not the golden child, not the rival I could never outshine, but just a girl who had been just as lost as I had been, fighting a battle we were both destined to lose. I smiled then, small and real and a little broken around the edges, but real nonetheless. Maybe it's time we both start fresh, I said, my voice soft but unflinching, offering not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but something better, a chance. Amber nodded once, a sharp jerk of her chin that said she understood more than she could ever say, and I turned again, walking away from the table, from the villa, from the weight of everything I had been expected to carry. The sunlight hit me full in the face as I stepped outside, warm and blinding and almost too much after so many years of cold, careful shadows. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. And as the heavy wooden door swung shut behind me, I felt it, the final snap of the last invisible chain that had ever tied me to anything less than freedom. They could call me a traitor. They could call me selfish. They could call me anything they wanted. But for the first time, Jenna, just Jenna, was choosing herself. And that was enough. They called her a traitor for choosing herself, but truth has a way of setting everyone free. Subscribe to discover more secrets families hide and how brave choices rewrite legacies.